There is a plant extract mentioned in scripture that has been used to treat infected wounds for over 3,000 years, and when researchers at Cardiff University tested it against hospital-grade antibiotics in 2016, they found it killed drug-resistant bacteria that nothing in the modern pharmacy could touch. The plant is called myrrh. A biblical family in ancient Judea could harvest the resin from a small tree that grew wild across the region, mix it with olive oil, and apply it directly to open wounds, burns, and infections. It cost nothing. It required no prescription. It did not expire. And it worked so effectively that physicians across the ancient world documented its use in medical texts still being studied today. The average American family spends over $1,200 per year on medications and doctor visits for conditions that biblical families treated at home with materials they grew or foraged. A jar of myrrh resin costs about $8 and lasts for years. So why has nobody told you about it? Because a $15 billion pharmaceutical industry cannot sell you a monthly prescription for something that grows on a tree. And when you understand what biblical families kept in their homes and how effectively those remedies treated common ailments, every bottle in your medicine cabinet is going to feel like a very expensive mistake. In first century Judea, every household maintained what would today be called a home pharmacy, but it looked nothing like the aisles at CVS. It was a collection of dried plants, rendered oils, fermented preparations, and mineral compounds stored in clay jars, leather pouches, and stone vessels. The mother of the household was responsible for maintaining it. She knew which plant treated fever, which oil drew infection from a wound, which root calmed a cough, and which preparation settled a child's stomach. This was not folk superstition. This was documented, repeatable, effective medicine developed through necessity by families who could not afford failure. A child with a raging fever in the ancient world either recovered or died. There were no emergency rooms. The remedies that survived 3,000 years survived because they worked. Mary, the mother of Jesus, would have known every one of these preparations. She would have harvested the plants herself or traded for them in the market. She would have prepared them by hand, and she would have used them on her own children when they were sick, injured, or in pain. The materials were ordinary plants, common oils, and household staples that every family had access to. Honey, olive oil, garlic, figs, hyssop, frankincense, myrrh, wine, salt. And here is what modern researchers found when they stopped dismissing these as primitive folk cures and actually tested them in controlled laboratory conditions. The results embarrassed an entire industry. Honey, which appears repeatedly in scripture as both food and medicine, is not just a sweetener. It is a chemically active wound dressing. When applied to an open wound, honey releases hydrogen peroxide through an enzymatic reaction with moisture in the tissue. This creates a sustained antimicrobial effect that kills bacteria on contact. It also draws moisture out of bacterial cells through osmotic pressure, effectively dehydrating them to death. Modern hospitals now use medical-grade honey dressings for burn victims and post-surgical wound care because nothing synthetic works as well. A biblical family applied raw honey directly to cuts, burns, and abscesses. It cost nothing. A jar of raw honey today costs about $12 and treats dozens of wounds. The pharmaceutical wound care industry generates over $20 billion per year, selling products engineered to do what honey does naturally, except honey does it better, costs less, and never expires. Olive oil, which every biblical household produced or purchased in bulk, was the base carrier for nearly every topical remedy. When infused with crushed garlic, it became a potent antibacterial treatment for ear infections. Garlic contains allicin, a sulfur compound that disrupts bacterial cell walls. A mother in ancient Judea would crush fresh garlic cloves, steep them in warm olive oil, strain the mixture, and apply a few drops into the infected ear. Pediatricians today prescribe amoxicillin for the same condition. The antibiotic costs about $25 per prescription, requires refrigeration, expires in 2 weeks, and contributes to antibiotic resistance. The garlic and oil preparation costs about 50 cents, lasts indefinitely at room temperature, and produces no resistant bacteria. The modern pharmaceutical model is not built to cure, it is built to manage. Chronic conditions generate recurring revenue. A remedy that actually resolves an infection in 3 days is worth less to the industry than a prescription that requires monthly refills. Biblical remedies were designed by families who needed their children healthy immediately because there was no safety net, no insurance, no follow-up appointment. The remedy either worked or it did not. That selection pressure produced solutions that modern labs are now rediscovering and patenting under new names. Frankincense and myrrh, the gifts brought to the infant Jesus by the Magi, were not symbolic, they were medicine. Frankincense resin contains boswellic acids, which are among the most potent natural anti-inflammatory compounds ever tested. When researchers at the University of California analyzed frankincense extract, they found it inhibited the same inflammatory pathways targeted by ibuprofen and corticosteroids, but without the liver toxicity, stomach bleeding, or hormonal disruption. A biblical family burned frankincense as incense to purify the air in a sick room, a practice that modern studies have confirmed reduces airborne bacteria by up to 68%. They also dissolved the resin in wine or oil and applied it to inflamed joints, infected gums, and respiratory congestion. Myrrh kills drug-resistant bacteria that survive every antibiotic in the modern arsenal. Biblical families chewed myrrh resin to treat mouth infections and gum disease. They dissolved it in wine to treat intestinal parasites. They mixed it with olive oil and applied it to wounds that would not heal. The resin costs about $8 per ounce today and lasts for years. The average American spends over $300 per year on anti-inflammatory medications alone, most of which produce side effects that require additional medications to manage. This is not obscure. This is not debatable. This is published, peer-reviewed pharmacological research. So why does nobody teach it? Why is this not in a single health textbook your children will ever read? Because the answer to that question is worth $500 billion per year to the companies that need you to keep buying the synthetic alternative. The displacement of biblical medicine began in earnest in the early 20th century, when the Flexner Report of 1910 redefined medical education in America. Funded by the Carnegie Foundation and championed by the American Medical Association, the report systematically discredited herbal medicine, midwifery, and home treatment as unscientific and dangerous. Medical schools that taught botanical medicine were defunded or shut down. Licensing laws were rewritten to require degrees from institutions that taught only pharmaceutical-based treatment. The stated goal was to professionalize medicine and eliminate quackery. The actual effect was the elimination of every treatment model that could not be patented, bottled, and sold at scale. By 1930, knowledge that had been common in every household for 3,000 years was suddenly illegal to practice without a medical license. The remedies did not stop working. They were simply made inaccessible through regulatory capture lobbied for by an industry that could not monetize them. Pharmaceutical companies cannot patent honey. They cannot patent garlic. They cannot patent myrrh. But they can patent synthetic derivatives, rebrand them under trademarked names, and sell them at markups of 2,000% or more. The modern pharmaceutical industry is not in the business of curing disease. It is in the business of managing symptoms with products that require indefinite use. Biblical families could not afford that model. They needed cures. Here is how to rebuild the biblical medicine cabinet in your own home starting this week. First, raw honey. Buy a jar of raw, unfiltered honey from a local beekeeper or health food store. Processing destroys the enzymes that make honey medically active. Raw honey lasts indefinitely. Keep it in a sealed jar at room temperature. For minor cuts, scrapes, or burns, clean the wound with water. Apply a thin layer of honey directly to the injury and cover it with a clean cloth. Change the dressing daily. Infected wounds that resist conventional treatment often resolve within 3 to 5 days. Second, garlic-infused olive oil for ear infections. Crush 3 fresh garlic cloves and steep them in a 1/4 cup of warm olive oil for 20 minutes. Strain out the solids. Apply 2 to 3 drops of the warm oil into the affected ear twice daily. The infection typically resolves within 48 hours. Store the oil in a sealed jar in the refrigerator for up to 1 week. Third, myrrh resin. Buy food-grade myrrh resin online or from a specialty herbalist. Dissolve a small piece, about the size of a pea, in a tablespoon of warm olive oil. Apply the mixture to infected wounds, gum infections, or skin abrasions. For internal use, dissolve a pea-sized piece in a small glass of red wine and drink it slowly to treat intestinal inflammation or parasites. Fourth, frankincense resin or essential oil. Burn frankincense resin as incense in a sick room to reduce airborne bacteria. For joint pain or respiratory congestion, mix 3 drops of frankincense essential oil with a tablespoon of olive oil or coconut oil and massage it into the affected area. Fifth, big poultices for abscesses and boils. This remedy appears directly in Scripture. In 2 Kings 20, the prophet Isaiah instructs King Hezekiah to apply a poultice of pressed figs to a boil, and the king recovers. Figs contain enzymes that draw infection to the surface and promote drainage. Mash fresh or dried figs into a paste, apply it directly to the abscess, cover with a clean cloth, and leave it in place for several hours or overnight. Repeat daily until the infection drains and heals. Total cost of outfitting a biblical medicine cabinet with honey, garlic, olive oil, myrrh, frankincense, and figs, approximately $40 to $60. Total annual cost of the average American household's over-the-counter and prescription medication purchases, over $1,200. The biblical system lasts for years. The modern system requires monthly repurchases, and the biblical system actually resolves conditions instead of managing them indefinitely. Every remedy you learn is one less doctor visit, one less prescription, one less copay, one less product you need someone else to manufacture and sell to you. The families described in Scripture were not medically primitive, they were medically self-sufficient. They treated fever, infection, inflammation, parasites, wounds, and respiratory illness with materials they grew, foraged, or rendered from ingredients already in their homes. This knowledge was common. Every mother knew it, every grandmother taught it. And then, over the course of a single generation, it was systematically removed from the culture and replaced with a dependency model that generates $500 billion per year. The remedies did not stop working. They were displaced because they worked too well, lasted too long, and cost too little. You cannot build a pharmaceutical empire on something that grows on a tree, but that knowledge is still available. The plants still grow. The chemistry still works. The results are still verifiable. Pick one remedy this week, just one. Buy a jar of raw honey and use it the next time you get a cut. Crush garlic into olive oil the next time your child complains of an earache. Buy a small piece of myrrh resin and dissolve it in oil the next time you have a wound that will not heal. Tell me in the comments which one you are trying first. Tell me if your grandparents or great-grandparents used any of these, because I promise you somebody in your family tree knew every remedy on this list. That knowledge did not die. It just went quiet. It is time to start listening again.